right. And so the serpent tricked me, and I ate. The Lord said, oh, my goodness. You're going to be cursed among animals. Oh, and I'm going to greatly increase your pangs in childbirth. Reverend Patricia.
Elizabeth, are you okay?
Well, I'm reading the story of Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden, and it's just not making any sense to me.
Well, I certainly understand your struggle.
I mean, so I'm reading it, and it talks about how God created everything in the beginning, and it was good. But then there was this tree, and God put the tree in the garden and said, you can eat from any tree but that tree. So, of course, they ate from that tree. And there was a serpent who tricked them into that, which didn't seem fair, that God created a serpent that would do that. And then they were punished, and then we're punished for the rest of eternity because of this one mistake, and it's not fair.
Well, Elizabeth, I understand your confusion. I absolutely do. People have been working with this story for centuries, in fact, thousands of years, trying to make sense of it, trying to find some kind of meaning from it.
Excuse me, I'd like to help here, if I may.
Well, of course. And who are you?
Why, I'm St. Augustine. See the halo? I'm a saint. I'm one of the 4th century early Christian fathers, and I think I can help you out here.
Well, you know, we're just accustomed in Unity to having 4th century saints drop by all the time. Give us what you got. Tell us what you got.
Well, thank you. And shoo-shoo, I don't need you. Shoo-shoo. It is clear that this story is about the fall of man. Adam and Eve chose to disobey God's order, not to eat of the tree of good and evil, and they were rightly punished. It's clear to me that this is the story of the snake that was Satan. Now, it doesn't say that in the Bible, but it also doesn't say the phrase original sin. The deliberate sin of the first man is the cause of original sin. And that stain of Adam is on each one of us forevermore. This is the story of the fall of man from perfection to the sinful state that we exist in today. And redemption only comes through the blood of Jesus Christ. Only that will save you.
Excuse me. I'd like to share my opinion on this topic.
And who are you to dispute
I'm
a
Charles
saint?
Fillmore, founder of Unity. I've been updating saintly teachings my whole career.
Oh, bah. You Unity people, always reinterpreting.
That was quite some interpretation. And with all due respect to the good saint, I just have to say I disagree with much of what he believes. I do not believe this is a story about the original sin of man. People have been troubled by this notion that Adam and Eve made a big mistake that we all pay for. I say no. Instead, we find that we are born in the image and likeness of God. But man did fall. Let's be clear. I do believe in a fall, but a different type of fall. We fall every time we forget our true divinity, the glory of Christ. We are saved when we remember once again that we are spiritual beings, just as Jesus taught.
Excuse me?
Yes?
Excuse me? My esteemed colleague, I just want to share my interpretation with you.
You want to reinterpret my reinterpretation?
Of the interpretation, yes.
Oh. Certainly, sir.
Yeah.
I never said I had the final word.
Shalom. I am Rabbi Harold Kushner. Perhaps you have heard of me. You may know me from my book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. It's a wonderful book, and you should go out and buy it and read it. And, oh, your minister, Reverend Patricia, has several good books here. Oh, this one looks exceptionally good. Oh, yeah. How good do we have to be? By me. I am very much aligned with what Charles had to say, but I want to go even further. I think we have misunderstood this story. It's really not about original sin. It's about the evolution into humanity. It's about the emergence of the human race. It's about our need to embrace all of us, that which is perfect and that which is imperfect. It's an inspiring, liberating story about how wonderful and how complicated and how painful and how rewarding it is to be human. God does not stop loving us every time we do something wrong, and neither should we stop loving ourselves. Can we close that back door over there, please, because we have to keep this within the confines of this room. If any religion tells you otherwise, it is a bad religion. I think we're okay. I really don't believe that eating from the tree of knowledge was sinful. I believe it is one of the bravest and the most liberating events of the human race. And that's my take on the issue.
Those were some wonderful stories and ideas, but I have to say, Reverend Patricia, I am still confused.
You know what? Why don't you have a seat and we'll see if we can make some sense out of this. Thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you, Eric and Barbara and Bob. So we're continuing our series today called What Do You Really Believe? What do you really believe about original sin? Because you see, when you get clear on what you really believe about the important spiritual matters of life, then you can lead the empowered life. Then you can lead a life of integrity. But it's kind of hard to live a life of integrity when you are not clear what your own beliefs are. So you have just heard three very different viewpoints on original sin and on the story of Adam and Eve in the Bible. First, we heard from St. Augustine, who lived in the 4th and the 5th centuries. And back in that day, there were many different perspectives on the story of Adam and Eve and on this notion of original sin, which St. Augustine was absolutely correct, does not appear as a term in the Bible. But at the end of the day, the doctrine of original sin, as St. Augustine saw it, ended up being the doctrine that was put forth and still today carries forth in many churches as well. And his theology is called fall redemption theology. The theory is that we have fallen, that mankind has fallen, and that we need redemption. That we need redemption. Salvation comes in a number of different ways, and many different churches have interpreted how that salvation might come. Perhaps it comes through baptism. Perhaps it came through the very death of Jesus and his shedding blood on the cross. Perhaps salvation comes through a profession of faith at some point in life. So this fall redemption theology says we need redemption. And then we heard from Charles Fillmore, the co-founder of Unity, along with his wife, Myrtle Fillmore. And Charles Fillmore says that, yes, indeed, that there is a fall, was a fall, every time we forget who we are. Every time you forget that at the center of you is the Christ. Every time you forget that there is a spark of divinity in you. You see, we have to realize that there are two creation stories in the Bible. There's the one about Adam and Eve, and then there's the one, remember, where God created the earth in 7 days and created humankind in God's image and likeness and called it all good. So unity teaches that we are born in the image and likeness of God, that we are inherently good, that we are Christ in expression in human form. And yet we too fall because we forget. We forget our true spiritual nature. And then we heard from Rabbi Harold Kushner, who wrote that wonderful book, Why Bad Things Happen to Good People, and this book, How Good Do We Have to Be, which I heartily recommend, as does the rabbi himself, heartily recommend this book. He speaks about how it is that we make mistakes in life, and call them sins, if you will, but how it is that we make mistakes in life, and yet here's the thing. Nothing that we've ever said or done, nothing you've ever not said or not done can separate us from God's love. God's love is there always. And Rabbi Kushner goes on to say that every so-called mistake or sin is an opportunity for us to grow and to stretch. I love where he says it's the bravest thing that Adam and Eve could ever have done, to eat from that tree of the knowledge of good and evil. In fact, in this book, he says, it could have ended a different way. It could have ended a different way. It could have ended that they didn't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then life would have just gone on humming at the same tone all the time. Everything would have just been fine and all right every day. There would have been no, quote, evil. They would have known nothing but good. But it's an interesting thing about life. It is in the contrast that we sometimes come to know the depth of beauty and wonder. And so it didn't end that way. Instead, Adam and Eve bravely ate of this fruit, which it never says is an apple, by the way, but bravely ate of this fruit of this tree and suddenly knew all manner of possibilities, and then had the opportunity to make choices. Like you and I have the opportunity to make choices every day. And what will we choose, and how will we choose? And so what I want to ask you today is, what do you believe? What do you believe? Do you believe that people are inherently good? Or do you believe people are inherently bad? Or do you believe some people are inherently good and some people are inherently bad? Or do you believe that everybody's inherently good but you? Because clearly you've messed up and you know that, right? I mean, I know it. I've messed up, right? I figure everybody else is good but me. Or maybe everybody's inherently good except, I don't know, your mother-in-law? Or maybe your ex-spouse? Or maybe the business person who did you wrong in the deal. Clearly, they were not inherently good. I jest, but not really, because this could be one of the most important questions you ever ask yourself. This question frames your worldview. How you answer it, whether people are basically good or basically bad, how you answer this question informs every decision you ever make, every action you ever take, every human interaction that you have. Are you coming into it with the assumption that the person is fundamentally bad, trying to do good things, but fundamentally bad, or fundamentally good and maybe messes up occasionally? It is a worldview that we're talking about here. So what do you really believe? What do you really believe? And the emphasis is on the word really, because here's what I've come to observe. What I've come to observe is that we may think we believe one thing, we may say we believe one thing, but so often in what is called our shadow, there are other beliefs at play. Especially those folks who've been studying in unity for a long time know that unity teaches that people are fundamentally good. And so we teach people are fundamentally good, and we say and parrot that people are fundamentally good, and I behold the good in you, and I behold the Christ in you, and I see the spark of divinity in you. And deep in the recesses of our shadow, there are other beliefs which are guiding us even though we don't know that they are there. And so I'm just inviting you this week to to ask yourself what might be lurking in your subconscious and to know that it's okay. Whatever is there is okay, but you got to know it's there. I believe that people are fundamentally good most of the time. I mean, I believe that people are fundamentally good, and yet sometimes the way I speak to myself is not consistent with believing that people are fundamentally good. I think there's a PS in me that says everybody but me. And I'm working on that one. I don't know about you. So I'm inviting you this week to really search and ask yourself, what do you believe? What did you hear from those three wise ones? And there's certainly not the close the book on the story there. What did you believe? What do you believe makes sense and resonates in your heart from those three wise ones? So Unity believes that every person is created in the image and likeness of God. That means you are perfection through and through. Perhaps not fully expressing by some standards, but you are perfection. You have the Christ potential in you. Jesus was our way shower and our elder brother, and we are striving by following his teachings and studying his life to express that divine perfection. And then there's the question about evil. Now, if that's true, Patricia, what about the people who commit heinous crimes? What about people who do the unthinkable? What about them? Do they have the Christ in them too? Here's where the question begins to get more complicated, doesn't it? You know, we're hearing about the atrocities happening in Syria today. And we have to ask ourselves, are those people Christ in expression? Are they missing their Christ? What is it with them? It smells like evil to me. Is it possible that they are fundamentally good and that they have lost their way in some form? Eric Butterworth, in his book, Discover the Power Within You, says that in the concept of the divinity of man, if we buy off on this divinity of man, there are no bad or weak people. There are only good people expressing themselves incompletely and strong people frustrating their potential of strength. Well, I'll grant you that's a hard one to buy in some cases. I encourage you to think about how you might buy that, how you might come to know that still and all at the center of each person, there is a spark of the divine. That God created everyone in God's image and likeness. Of course, the real question here is about sin. And what is sin? And some people say, well, Unity doesn't talk about sin. Well, that's not true. Unity does talk about sin, but we speak of it in a different way. Sin, you see, if you do your research, is about falling short of your expectations or your hopes. Sin is about missing the mark, if you will. Falling short, missing the mark. And Rabbi Harold Kushner says so eloquently that we all sin. And as I use the word sin, I put quotes around it because we all make mistakes, but it's in those very mistakes that we can grow. As I was researching into this notion of sin, I found a wonderful article back in 1979 written in the Unity magazine by another Unity sage who I want to bring into the room. Perhaps you know this particular Unity sage. His name is Reverend Bob Barth. And back in 1979, Reverend Bob Barth wrote, rather than spending so much time worrying about mistakes and sin, focus on growth. Dare to take life and live it for all it's worth. Dare to miss the mark, to fall short, but remember that growth is your objective. Dare to eat the fruit and see where that leads. And always know that God is with you, in you, and as you. Ultimately, the real message we have to look at is, do you and I believe that we are inherently good or inherently bad? And Rabbi Kushner makes a very important distinction. He talks about the difference between the action and the actor, between what he calls guilt and shame. You see, guilt is that feeling we have when we have done or not done something that we think is wrong or bad. Shame is when we feel that we are wrong or bad. that something about us is inherently unworthy, not enough, dirty in some way. That's shame. Many of us in this room have experienced that feeling of shame, of not enoughness. Guilt, on the other hand, is when we did something that we wish we hadn't. Guilt can actually be positive. It can be a noticing for us that there's a different choice that we could have made. Now, religion has not helped this matter. Religion has not helped this matter at all. In Discover the Power Within You, Eric Butterworth talks about a particular man who had decided to stop going to church because of the negative messages he was receiving. And he shared and confided in Eric Butterworth. And he said, I finally faced myself with the question, why should I go to church week after week to have the preacher tell me how awful I am? I already know that. I need somebody to tell me about the goodness that is in me and help me to reach it. And if there isn't any goodness in me, then I might as well forget the whole thing. I'm not condemning religion. I'm not condemning other faith traditions. Each one has a path that's founded on the thinking that it believes is sound. But I know that downstairs in our fellowship time between the services, I spoke to more than one person who was feeling a little angry. One person put it very clearly. They said, I'm just so angry that for so many years I was told what a worthless sinner I was. And that it took me till now to know that that wasn't the truth. Again, I say each path has its merit in its own way, and it's up for you and me to choose the path that resonates with our heart, with your heart, for what is the truth about who you are. May Rowland, who is one of the great Unity leaders, she was director of Silent Unity for 55 years, and she said this. She said, our greatest sin is holding on to what we have thought of as our sin and not going forward because of it. Our greatest sin is holding on to what we thought of as a sin and letting that stop us. You see, here's the thing. You are never separate from God. You are always one from God. But you can feel separate from God. We've all been there. That's called a living hell. We have all felt separate from God. And what May Rowland is saying is that when you take a sin or a mistake, something that you've done that you're not proud of, and you hold on to that and take it into your identity and move forward with that, that is the greatest sin, because that keeps you feeling separate from God. It keeps you from fully loving and being with the people who matter in your life, from fully engaging in life, as it were. What are you carrying with you today that it's time to let go of? Wallowing in the sin. You know, now there may be some faith traditions that tell you that you need to self-punish, that the more guilt that you feel, the better, because somehow that's making up or atoning for the sin. But I don't buy into that. Instead, it creates separation, the illusion of separation. So this week, I'm asking you to take some time with these questions that are in your bulletin. Every week in our series of What Do You Really Believe, there are going to be questions for you to reflect on, to journal about, to discuss with others, to discuss with your family. If you're in one of the small study circles, you can discuss it in the circles. And there are powerful questions on here. So this is your home play, if you will, if you want to go deeper and get clearer about what you believe. And I want to tell you, by the way, that next week I'm just going to give you a heads up and a warning. Don't come next week if you don't want to learn to see the Bible in a new light. If you're real happy with exactly how you're seeing the Bible, just stay home. It's okay, really, just stay home. Because next week we're going to rock the boat a little bit. For some of you, it might be a lot. So these questions, I invite you to work with them as you go through the week, if you want to get clearer on what it is that you believe. And ask yourself, what are the messages that people have told you that you're carrying with you? Because that's where this notion of worthiness and unworthiness comes from. Maybe it came from a religious leader. Maybe it came from a parent. Maybe it came from a teacher. Maybe it came from a sister or a brother. Maybe it came, and here's the big one that we don't often accept. Maybe it came from what's called a race consciousness or a cultural consciousness, like the human race consciousness. There is this race consciousness of original sin that's out there. I got it as a kid, and I never heard it in church. Nobody ever spoke those words to me, but I got it. I took it in. Maybe you did too. Ask yourself, what are the messages that were spoken to you that you're carrying with you today? And maybe, and here's the interesting thing, maybe one of the stories that you are carrying with you is the story of original sin. Maybe you bought into a story that really doesn't resonate with your soul, but you took it as true. So I'm inviting you to look deeply at that story and see what you might be ready to release. In this book by Anthony DeMello, who was a Catholic monk and also very influenced by Eastern religion, this book is called The Song of the Bird, and he tells a story. He tells a story about two Buddhist monks who were on their way to the monastery, walking through a path in the woods, and they got down to the edge of the river where they needed to cross, and there at the edge of the river was a beautiful woman, and she was all beside herself because the river was too deep for her to cross by herself. So one of the monks, contrary to his faith, just picked her up, put her on his shoulders, and walked across the river, then placed her down. But the second Buddhist monk could not let it go. He was horrified. He was horrified that this other monk would violate his vows in such a way. Monks were not to touch a woman in any way. And so it says here, his fellow monk was thoroughly scandalized. For 2 hours, he berated him on his negligence in keeping the rule. Hadn't he forgotten, or had he forgotten that he was a monk? How did he dare touch a woman? And worse, carry her across the river? What would people say? Had he not brought their holy religion into disrepute? And so on he went for hours. The offending monk patiently listened to the never-ending sermon. And finally he broke in and said, "Brother, I dropped that woman at the river. Are you still carrying her?" So my question today is, are there messages that you're still carrying that it's time to lay down? And I'm going to share with you a technique that I've been using and see if it might just work for you to help lay down that load. I want you to imagine with me that you've got a bright yellow number 2 pencil with a little pink eraser at the edge of it. And we're going to use that pencil to erase the energies and the feelings and the memories. And so let's take just a moment to turn within and listen. I ask you, what are the stories and the messages that you might be carrying with you today about your worthiness? Messages that say, you're not as good as your brother. Maybe what you heard is that you're not intelligent. You're stupid. You're not worthy. You are a sinner. You deserve to be punished. You'll never amount to anything. I don't know what it might be for you. But I invite you to allow courageously those messages to come forward. And maybe you see them as if words written on a page. Maybe you feel them as an energetic feeling of separation. Maybe you even have an image, a painful image in your mind. So I invite you to take out this spiritual pencil with this beautiful eraser on the end of it. You can even imagine picking it up. You know, everyone's eyes are closed. You can imagine that you're holding this pencil in your hand right now. And in whatever way that this old story lingers with you still, I invite you to take that pencil and to begin to erase. To take that bright pink eraser on the end of that pencil and to erase this message. To erase the feeling that you have when you hold this thought. And then as you will notice when you put the pencil down, there are all these little pink rubber shavings. And I invite you to just blow them away, just blow them away. Maybe take your hand and brush them away. And if there's more, then pick up that pencil and do some more erasing. Just erase away. Allow God to guide your hand as you erase away the lingering stories that do not serve you. To know that they were never true of you, for you are the living Christ in expression. And you are good, inherently good, to the core. And when God sees you, God sees only good. And so, dear God, we close this time of imagery, this time of prayer, grateful for your presence in us, through us, as us, and around us. With every step we take, every action and non-action, we know that we are one with you, God. And for this, we are so very grateful. We let it go, we let it be, and we let God. And so it is. Amen.